What is one rule that was implemented at your school or work that backfired horribly? Story 1. My 4 years of high school were full of my school trying out new policies and procedures to use in the future. In my sophomore year, my school decided to make tests count for 100% of the grade, and homework count for 0%, but it was still assigned, and as you would expect, kids did absolutely no homework. The ones that didn't retain information well, or were bad test takers, struggled pretty hard to make the grade without homework padding it. Our failure rate was pretty high that year. Then my junior year, they brought homework grades back and made a new rule that there were no due dates, nor penalties for turning in late work for your 6 weeks. We didn't do quarters. As long as it was before the next 6 weeks started, you were good. This led to students doing no homework until the last few days of the 6 weeks. And teachers had to accept and grade them all before grades were due. This put teachers under immense stress by causing them to work insane hours and spend every hour at home grading, which made them very irritable and more likely to just shove pointless activities and busy work at us until they could finish grading. Story 2. Little backstory. My high school was a teeny tiny rural school with 600 kids in grades 7 to 12. Randomly at the beginning of the second semester of my senior year, the new principal, who had just moved here from an inner city school in another state, decided that we would no longer be allowed to carry backpacks or book bags in the house between classes for safety reasons. Makes sense in this day and age. But the students weren't happy about this abrupt change. In the clockwork of our tiny school, shenanigans ensued after this new rule came into effect, including every student dropping their books in the hall simultaneously at 10:50 one day. My personal favorite was the guy in my class who decided he would make something that couldn't be called a backpack. First, he took a bunch of belts and tied his books together so they could be carried on his back. That was shut down after a day or two. That's when it got hilarious. The next Monday, he came waltzing in wearing a product of his own design. He had made L-shaped shelves from pieces of wood that could be connected to the sides of his legs and proceeded to harness his books to these leg brace shelves. Needless to say, he was pulled from class before lunch. Story 3. I used to work for a production company that employed a lot of really skilled, award-winning editors. There were producers and executives and directors, but the real money makers, the people who really made the company, were the editors. So the company was basically centered around them. The executives would always order food for the editors, and the editors would usually eat in their offices while doing their thing. One day, the executives decided to cut paid lunches to save money. The editors all thought it was a bad move on their part, so they would go out for lunch and sometimes stay out for like 3 hours. There was nothing the company could do, really, because these editors were top of their game. And if Warner Brothers heard that the editor they always used had left, they might leave too, so the company couldn't do anything. They saved maybe $15 per person per day, but lost like 4 hours per person per day. Story 4. They made a new rule where we had to ask permission to use the restroom during lunch. We all coordinated and the whole cafeteria would raise their hands at once to request to go. They responded by sending us 2 at a time. We did this for a few days, then changed our procedure to everyone just getting up at once and going to the restroom without permission. They didn't ever officially do away with the rule, but the teachers on duty in the lunchroom eventually just stopped enforcing it. Edit. It's interesting how many people responded something like, "My school had the same rule," and how many people said something like, "What the heck? That's the craziest rule I've ever heard of. Is this even real?" Story 5. Don't do anything unless directed by your boss. Any deviation from this will result in write-up/termination. This was a very literal directive from upper management that took place after an office incident. Our work is very fluid, and our team alone contains 20 people. Needless to say, productivity hit unfounded lows. Story 6. When I was in kindergarten, during the morning announcements one day, they came on and said, "And please no throwing snowballs. There is a chance you might accidentally get some rocks in them." You could see on the faces of all 20-some students the realization that, oh my god, we could put rocks in them. Story 7. There was a rule they put in place during my freshman year of high school that if you arrived late, i.e., after the first bell, you couldn't park in the parking lot. You would have to park at the gas station down the highway and walk to school from there, making you even more late. It stopped after 20 or so people intentionally showed up late to school and made a mass exodus along the highway, on top of a lot of parents complaining. Story 8. My high school put in a policy so that after the third time you were late, you got detention. Tardiness decreased by 52-ish%. Absentees increased by 70%. Edit. The punishment for missing was nothing until social services came in. Story 9. Well, it wasn't a school-wide policy, but I had an awful French teacher who would constantly hand out detentions for things as inconsequential as walking to the trash can to throw away a piece of paper. She absolutely could not deal with the fact that we periodically might need to actually leave our chairs for a perfectly valid reason. One day she locked herself out of the classroom, and nobody would let her back in. "Sorry, we aren't allowed to get out of our seats." She had to get the janitor, lol. Story 10. If you violated the dress code policy, you had to wear these really big gray sweatpants or sweatshirts that said DCV in big orange letters, which stood for dress code violation. It became a thing to get caught because they were apparently really comfortable. When the admin finally caught on that people were trying to get them on purpose, they changed it so that you got an in-school suspension. The joke's on them for that too. Lots of kids preferred that over being in class. Story 11. In my dorm, if you did something that triggered the smoke/fire alarm, you had to do a safety presentation for everyone on your floor. This was intended to deter pranksters from pulling the alarm. A guy on our floor was making grilled cheese in the kitchenette and burned it, which legitimately triggered the fire alarm. Afterward, he explained, assuming that since it had been a legitimate alarm and not a prank, he wouldn't have to do a presentation. He was, of course, wrong. So the next Wednesday night, the entire floor assembled, and we were treated to a 30-minute safety presentation on the dangers of grilled cheese sandwiches. It contained literally nothing about fire safety. It was all choking hazards and cholesterol. Our RA was furious, but the student pointed out that the write-up that he'd been given just said safety presentation. We didn't get any more presentations after that. Story 12. My high school was trying to prevent a senior prank since the class before us had gotten a little out of hand. They basically told us not to have one, that they would get anyone who did anything in a lot of trouble, yada yada. So somebody has an idea. What if we do an anti-prank? The idea had floated around the halls, and everyone knew what we were going to do. For an entire week, every senior was going to bring a potentially threatening item for a senior prank to do nothing with it. The week starts and that Monday, nearly the entire school of approximately 2,600 students, 650 graduating class, so there are hundreds of bananas being carried through the halls, and teachers and assistant principals freaking out. By noon, an announcement was made that all bananas needed to be eaten or thrown away or they would be confiscated. So by that afternoon, every banana was taken away from the student. The next day got even better. Somebody has the idea that we should all bring a gallon jug of water with us to class. And to no one's surprise, again there is an announcement that they are going to start taking up the water jugs for fear of what we are going to do with them. But this time the students got creative. People are resentful now and do not want to give up their precious water. Students getting creative, hiding them in backpacks, avoiding teachers in the hallways, whatever it takes to keep their water jugs. But alas, most of the jugs had been confiscated. So the students start taking to social media. Tons of tweets and mentions are going out to local news stations. TMZ, Oprah, Ellen, you name it. They got mentioned. All of these messages are going out along the lines of: school is confiscating all water, not allowing students to drink water. Hashtag high school drought 2000. Hashtag we're not gonna make it. Hashtag send help. You get the picture. Before the end of the day, 2 different news reporters were at our school. Guess we had the last laugh after all. TLDR? The school made silly rules to not let us have a senior prank. We anti-pranked them and their rules backfired. Lots of negative press over nothing malicious ever happening. Story 13. My company tried a policy of absolutely no alcohol on site, even for parties, picnics, or anything. It stopped after just a few weeks when some employees demanded that the almost weekly cocktail parties for the directors and important managers be alcohol-free too, or they would report them. Edit. My most upvoted comment is about booze. Story 14. My company, as part of its alcohol policy, said you should not drink for at least 4 hours before coming to work. When engineers got called about production problems over the weekend, they all just had a beer, but couldn't be there in about 4 or 5 hours. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell button to receive notifications to my latest videos.